Audio check 1, 2, 3, 4.
Good evening. I'm Dan Shear, editor of the Green Valley News and the Sahuarita Sun, and I'm the moderator for this evening's forum. The Citizens Clean Elections Commission is the sponsor of this event. As the state's voter education agency, Clean Elections is the official sponsor of Arizona debates, so voters have the opportunity to hear directly from the candidates, ask questions on the issues that matter most to them, and to vote informed. All registered voters can participate in the general election on November 5th. The voter registration deadline is October 7th. That's today. So if you are watching live, you have until 11:59 to get registered. And the early voting begins October 9th. Voters watching this forum can submit a question at any time through email by emailing debates@kc-a.com. That's debates@kc-a.com. You can text them to 408-840-8350, or you can call 480-937-1253, and I'll repeat that later on. Tonight, we're going to be hearing from one House and one Senate candidate in State Legislative District 19, which includes all or parts of 5 counties: Pima, Santa Cruz, Cochise, Graham, and Greenlee. This district includes Green Valley, parts of Sahuarita, Sierra Vista, and Safford, and a whole lot more. Joining us is Bob Karp. He's a Democratic challenger for state Senate, and Greg Frostrom, a Democrat challenging for a House seat. Not joining us for this debate are the 3 Republican incumbents, State Representatives Gail Griffin and Lupe Diaz, and State Senator David Gowan. Again, they opted not to participate. They were invited. There are 2 open House seats and 1 Senate seat in LD19. I just want to note that in the House race, a voter can vote for 2 candidates, but you don't have to. It's just fine to mark your ballot for one of the 3 who will be on the ballot. Candidates, you're going to have 1 minute for your opening and closing statements, and up to 2 minutes for your response to the questions, most of which will come from voters. But since there's just 2 of you, you're both from the same party and not in the same race, we're going to be relaxing those rules quite a bit. It's going to be more of a conversation. Senate candidate Bob Karp, we're going to start with you. Why don't you take a minute and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Dan, and thank you to the Clean Elections Commission for hosting this candidate forum. I have run twice previously. In 2018, I ran for the state House, and in 2020, I ran for the state Senate. So you can guess that I'm either a glutton for punishment, or I think it's important to run. And I do think it's important to have the ability to have a real conversation about the issues. And the only way to do that is to stand up and represent another viewpoint. I'm disappointed that Senator Gowan is not part of this, because it would be great to hear his viewpoints as well. He's been in the state legislature for 14 years. Thank you.
Mr. Frostrom, your turn.
Yes, thank you, Dan, and thank you for having me. My name is Greg Frostrom. I am originally from rural Maryland, and I grew up in a small town surrounded by chicken farms and soybean fields. And I moved to Arizona more than 10 years ago, but this is my 3rd time living in Arizona. I fell in love with Arizona when I came out to serve with the Army, and I spent 23 years in the Army. My ethic is service. I want to serve my family, I want to serve my community, and I want to serve the constituents of LD19. I am deeply concerned that their representation is not serving them well, and I want to have a conversation about the issues that are impacting them on a day-to-day basis that are being ignored by the Republican incumbents.
Okay. Very good. Okay. Again, as I'll point out, your candidates in different chambers, but the issues, of course, are the same. So I'm going to have each of you answer the same question. Mr. Karp, we're going to start with you. And remember that a lot of these are questions directly from viewers. What would your top 3 priorities be if elected, Mr. Karp?
Thanks, Dan. Always getting 3 is difficult, but I will limit the list to 3. The first is reproductive rights, particularly the abortion access initiative is critical, and to healthcare freedom. The second is funding public schools as the number one priority and dealing with the private school vouchers, also known as ESA vouchers. My concern is that the program should be killed because it's siphoning off up to $600 million in the next 2 years from the public school system. The third would probably be water rights and the crisis of groundwater depletion, particularly in Cochise County. Obviously, the Green Valley people may not be as aware of it, but it is a crisis in Cochise County. It is beginning to become a crisis in Graham County, not so much in Greenlee, but it is something also that faces the Phoenix area in a slightly different way. So water rights, public school education, and reproductive rights are the three major issues that I'm running on.
Okay, great. And if we get to all of our questions today, we're going to be hitting on a couple of those priorities later on. Greg Frostrom, top three priorities if you're elected.
Top three, public education, fully funding our schools and completely eliminating or revamping the ESA voucher program so that's not abused. The healthcare that I have access to, being very close to Tucson, and mostly through broadband initiatives and things that we're not doing well for our rural partners. And finally, water. We just spent Saturday afternoon with a group of people out in Sun Sites, and it's a bad scene out there.
Okay, very good. Mr. Frostrom, we'll throw this next one at you first. It's a big district. I know you have been both out there quite a bit, as you just mentioned. What are you hearing from voters that maybe has surprised you a little bit?
There's a proposed lithium mine out in the Wilcox area on the playa, and that is a nesting area for sandhill crane.
He's feared.
And other birds that come. It's much more controversial than I was aware of when I started this process. And it's this challenge of we want to ensure our ability to act as responsible environmental stewards. The damage that you have from large-scale mining operations on the environment is known and pronounced. At the same time, we're challenged because these are minerals that we have to get out of the earth in order to remain competitive as a state and as a nation. And if we don't mine these areas, how do we remain competitive on a global scale? And I'll put my old Army national security hat on. We look at China and Russia around the world doing things without any regard to environmental regulation. I would love to be able to have a conversation about how we protect the environment and still gain the resources we need.
Very good. Okay, Mr. Karp, anything out there you're hearing that might have surprised you a little bit?
Yeah, and this is sort of local to Cochise County. We had in May or in March a special election for creating a jail district, which turned out to be much more controversial than I thought it would be, because it was to increase a tax for 25 years. So I'm going to relate that to a more general idea. And this came up, and when I started to run doing public events, the jail vote came up multiple times, even after it passed. And what I realized is people are concerned about the failure of local governments to prepare or plan for the future. And part of it has to do with the fact that the state has limited local governments to how much they can tax. So there's all sorts of caps on local taxes at the county level. So what they have to do is they have to come up with these crazy bonds in order to get more funding. And this really surprised me that there was this much real antagonism about even having to vote to replace a 40-year-old local county jail in Bisbee. So that really caught me off guard.
Okay, Mr. Karp, we're going to stick with you as we go on to the next question. Let's face it, there's a whole lot of us versus them mentality at the state legislature. How are you going to dial that down?
Wow. I guess I should be nice. That would be the first thing. There's always this conversation about civility, and in fact, I have it on my literature. and I think nobody believes it. I think the most important thing you could do once you're in there is say, once a week, I want to caucus with the other people in the party, in the Republican Party, that we can get together and discuss a single issue. Let's find one that we can discuss. And I remember when I ran in 2020, there was a Republican, I don't know that he's still in the state legislature, who wanted to reform a cash bail. And I didn't know anything about cash bail. And so I started following him, and I said, this is something I could learn about and I could get involved with. I think in the current legislature, there may be a few people on the Republican Party that really want to deal with the water crisis. And so let's find an issue. Let's start meeting regularly on it. And I think that starts the process of creating a group of people that really want to legislate and get things done.
But, isn't there a sense, though, and I'm going to say that it's probably more on the Republican side, that if you collaborate with the Democrats, or if a Democrat collaborates with Republicans, you're going to get kind of the cold shoulder from your own party? I mean, I think that's what this viewer means by this us versus them mentality.
Well, I think for me personally, and as you'll hear as we go on, I don't really care that people in the Democratic Party are going to like me or not like me. I'm there to do a job. I mean, obviously, I want to be liked on a personal level, but whatever my policies are and what I think is important, I should feel comfortable, and I will feel comfortable of reaching out to whomever I have to. The only way this is going to stop is by not having the thin skin. Just, you know what? Do it. If Liz Cheney can do it, I mean, come on. I much higher stakes. I can certainly talk to somebody in the Republican Party.
Okay, very good. Greg Frostrom, House candidate. You have to acknowledge that there is this us versus them mentality at the legislature. How do you deal with that?
I'm sorry, was that to me?
Yes.
Okay. Reminding people who we're here to serve. I think that's if the starting point and the starting attitude is we are here to serve our neighbors in LD19 or whatever district that you're in, what is in their best interests from a holistic standpoint, that's, I think, the biggest way that we can start that process. Talking about, getting along with our neighbors, there is definitely a demand signal within legislature to reform certainly in the House, and that's what I'm getting from other House members that I've already spoken to, and some of the background on the issues that are specifically facing LD19. If I'm successful, Gail Griffin would not be bottling up water bills in her committee under the Natural Resources and Water Committee. So that would be a good indicator that we're going to start making some progress and working together.
Okay, and to the viewers, we're aware that Mr. Frostrom is cutting in and out. We're working on that. So,
yeah.
Remind people of who we are, Mr. Frostrom, who we are serving. That's noble and idealistic, but when they control both chambers, why would they even care what you think? And isn't that kind of the issue, is that they've got most of the control over there?
And I think that is part of the problem, is that they're acting like a one-seat majority in both houses is a supermajority, that they've got 65, 67 seats. But frankly, because we only need to flip one seat in each house of the legislature to tie, and we would have a Democratic trifecta in that sense.
Okay, and then let's say that does happen. Are you then going to do to them what they're doing to you?
I think that looking at it from an issue standpoint, there's clear demand for these changes. And that's the frustration I think a lot of voters have, is that the Republican leadership is not listening to public polling, to public policy experts about what Arizonans need. You look at the fact that if you tell people that the ESA voucher
Dan, can I, let's see if he comes back.
Yeah, let's give him a second to come back. If not,
Yeah.
we're going to move
I
on.
would like to just give a little viewpoint on that, the last
Okay.
part of that question.
Why don't you go ahead, Mr. Karp? Go
Yeah.
ahead.
One of the things that I've talked about in the past was the budget process is broken because only the majority party puts the budget together and then they just shove it out of 2 days before the end of the legislature. I said if I was on the budget committee in the Senate, I would insist, because we'd be in the majority, that the minority be involved. And I believe that that's the way it should be on hearings as well. You don't let committee chairs decide what legislation is going to be heard, but certainly on the budget, we should have true bipartisan input. And I have said that when I ran in 2020, and I said that when I ran in 2018.
Have you ever seen it worse than it is now, or have you ever seen it work as you believe it should work?
It seems worse when they got down to one, when they only had a majority of one. It seems to have gotten a lot worse. But there's been a lot of infighting. I don't want to rag on the Republicans, but there's been a lot of infighting in the Republican majority because they need to hold that majority. So there's been less acrimony in the Democratic side because they're in the minority. But so it seems a little more severe, but I'm not a student of, I haven't been in the legislature, so it's hard for me to be able to say. From the outside, it looks worse to me, but the entire political system seems more at odds right now.
Okay, very good. Okay, we're going to move on to the ESAs, those empowerment scholarship accounts that you mentioned earlier. That's money that K-12 students can get to pay for home or private education. It's a little more involved than that, but that's the basics. The program was expanded recently and is pushing an additional $300 million or more away from public schools. And it looks like that's only going to grow. A lot of people are excited about it. They think, yes, this is how it should work. And others are fearful for public school funding. What do you think of the ESAs? And should the program be capped, rolled back, canceled? What would you do with it? Mr. Carr.
Oh, me.
Yeah.
I've made the statement. It's a public statement. It's on my website. I want to kill the program. Let's start over. Let's get it back to what it originally was, which was a program for vouchers for special needs students who could not get the resources they needed from their local school districts, particularly rural school districts. The problem with the program is twofold. One, it takes money out of the public school system when they said it wouldn't. That's just not the case. It's taking funds from the public school system. I don't believe taxpayer money should go to private schools, particularly religious private schools, at all. But if we're going to have it, what we should be doing is what the Governor Hobbs proposed was an 8-point plan to cap it, to make sure that it was responsible, that the money was spent correctly, that there was some curriculum requirements, that there were some safety requirements. We do not know how that money is being spent. And my concerns of it, other than just it eviscerating the public school system, is also what's going to happen in 10 years when these kids come out of this program. What's our employers going to think when they look at these kids and they're not properly educated? Now, some will be. I'm not saying all of them will not be. That's a very elitist sort of attitude, but I'm very concerned about this. And particularly for rural Arizona, for a great part of what I would represent, the public school is the center of rural life. You go to Clifton, you go to Duncan, you go to some of these small places, Elfrida, Bowie, and you go, there's no alternative. They're going to take a voucher and they're going to go to a private school. Where? So I am very concerned about the program. As I said, I would prefer to kill it. If I can't kill it, let's reform it.
So you say that Well, you say, what would we do in 10 years if these kids are coming out and they're just not properly educated? But isn't that the reason a lot of parents are opting for the ESAs? Because they feel like they're not getting a proper education in the public schools.
Well, my concern, and again, I'm not trying to be judgmental, is a lot of what people pull out of the public school system is because they don't like the values that are being what they think the values that are being espoused in the public school system. They're not talking about curriculum. They're talking about something other than curriculum. And again, if I thought that the program would educate people, that at least would give me some security. But again, I do not believe public taxpayer money should be used for private schools, period. That the public schools, this goes back to the founding of the country, that the public schools are a need that we all have agreed to fund. I strongly still advocate for public schools.
Okay, very good. And Mr. Frostrom, you're back with us.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
Not a problem. We're asking about empowerment scholarship accounts. Let me ask the question, and we're going to throw it your way. That's the money K-12 students can get to pay for home or private education. And the program has expanded recently, pushing a lot more money away from the public schools, and that's probably going to grow. What do you think of ESAs, and what should we do with that program?
I think when you say that 70% of the kids that are accepting ESA vouchers, or families that are accepting ESA vouchers, already had their kids enrolled in private school or were homeschooling. Most of those families are making incomes of over $100,000 a year. And now we're talking about taking money out of the public schools to pay for these taxpayer subsidies for private education purposes. The ESA voucher was supposed to be for extreme special needs kids who were not able to be served properly by their local schools. What we're seeing is that there is absolutely a demand signal for public funding of public schools. 14 out of the 17 bond vouchers in Southern Arizona to increase public school funding passed the last election cycle, in the 22 cycle. There were a whole bunch of bond vouchers, bond initiatives for increased public school funding, and most of the ones in Southern Arizona passed. And that's a good indicator that the public doesn't want this money going out of the public school system, because we're raising our hands, and we did it here in Vail. Hey, I'm willing to pay more taxes so I can see more money going into my local school. So I would say that what you are seeing as a larger problem is that a lot of these Republicans around the country are looking at ways to defund the public education system writ large. And I'm not sure why that is. I think a lot of it is just basic mistrust in government, but that's what's going on.
So then what specifically would you do with the current ESA program? Would you do away with it like Mr. Karp suggests?
I think it has to go back to what it was supposed to be. If you've got a kid that has absolutely has special needs that cannot be served by their local school. And that's really challenging in these rural areas. And that's what ticks me off, is that there's not going to be suddenly a big charter school and it's going to open up in Wilcox to support that community. Those dollars are gone permanently from that school system. And most of the kids down there are going to suffer as a result.
On Saturday, I led a debate at the Catalina Foothills District, and I was very surprised to learn that about half the students in that district are there by open enrollment. They were pretty much, for the most part, fleeing Tucson Unified School District, which does not have the best reputation. Right. If Catalina weren't nearby, ESAs would probably serve to give them a better education than some of the parents feel they were getting in TUSD. Wouldn't that be a good use of ESA funds, Mr. Karp? Start Mr. Karp, and then we'll.
Okay. Yeah. I would rather fight to improve Tucson School District. I think that's an easy out. And again, I understand the need. I don't think taking taxpayer dollars and transferring them out of the public school system is a solution to improving public schools. I'm just like, let's fight it out at the public school level. Get parents to demand that Tucson School District improve.
Okay. Mr. Frostrom?
Similar sentiment is that, if the problem is with the local school system, then we need to dig in. And I understand that there are, and this is the complaint. This is what a lot of Republicans say, that the schools are so entrenched, and the teachers unions are so obstinate for change and that sort of thing. Well, we can have a serious discussion about that, but the answer is not take my ball and go somewhere else to play for the entire community.
Okay, we're going to stick with the subject of schools, and Mr. Karp, we'll start with you on this. A recent analysis by the consumer research firm Consumer Affairs ranked Arizona worst in the nation for public education. It cited ACT scores, graduation rates, funding, and even the quality of higher education. We can dive deeper into those numbers, but I think we get the picture here. How did we get here, and how are we going to dig ourselves out of this hole?
Invest in public schools, because the things that you're talking about all go back to the amount of money that's being spent in the classroom. We're in the lowest 10%. I think we're like 47. We're 48th in teacher salaries. People will say, and I've heard this multiple times, so when you say, let's spend more money on the public schools, what's said is, oh, well, they're wasting money. That's always the first response you hear, is they're wasting money. I don't believe that the public schools are wasting money. I'm sure there are areas where public schools can do better, but they're doing with a lot less. It's at two levels. It's money being put into the school, into the classroom. It's also money being put into the capital improvements part of the school systems. There is no money being put into the capital improvement systems. We have schools down here in southeastern Arizona, in rural Arizona, that are 50, 80 years old, that don't have air conditioning. So when we talk about bad results in any other type of institution, in any business, you would not have the business community saying, oh, it's okay for us to be 50th out of 50 and we're not going to invest any more money. So let's start by really having a serious conversation about how much money we're going to invest in public schools.
But is it a little short-sighted to think that money is the solution to this?
It's part of the solution. But when you turn it around and say money isn't the solution, what are you asking? And I'll give you, when we sit between California, New Mexico, and Colorado, and even Nevada, where they all spend more money in the classroom than we do, what do you think employers are thinking? What are they thinking about what kind of students are coming out of our system? Because they say to themselves, you're not investing. So yes, investing is part of it. Curriculum reform, better. I'm not a big fan of standardized testing anymore. I think the idea of standardized testing was a great idea. And again, I'm not running for school board, so I'm not an expert. but I have an attitude, which is let's invest and let's reform at the same time.
Very good. Okay, Mr. Frostrom, Arizona's failing schools. How do we dig ourselves out of this hole?
Increasing teacher salaries has got to be step one. My daughter turned 25 yesterday. Happy birthday, Rebecca. She just started her first career. She started as a teacher in 6th grade teaching English, and she took over her first classroom, and she's not in Arizona. And she didn't want to be a teacher in Arizona because she didn't think she could afford to live in Arizona based on what she was going to make. We've got teachers in Vail who can't afford to live in Vail. That's a problem statewide in most metro areas. And it's also tough to recruit teachers for rural areas. You've got Wilcox and Benson that are struggling to find qualified people to sit in classrooms. So I think raising teacher salaries got to be very, very high on the priority list. But again, to Bob's point, when we have, and this is federalism work, we've got mandates from the federal government because the federal government says, hey, we have to have a basic standard for every high school graduate in this country because they're not competing for jobs with each other in Scottsdale or Vail or Benson. They're competing for jobs with kids that are graduating high school in Mumbai and Belgium and wherever. So we have these minimum standards, and yeah, it can be challenging to meet those federal requirements, but that's why we're doing these things. So prioritizing teacher salaries, prioritizing capital improvement, and then looking at what we can save in the curriculum to get better outcomes. I think what they're doing with Pima County Community College and their partnership with the Amazon warehouse here is a good example when you're talking about graduating young kids into that workforce or the first step in higher education. Those are good models to look at and bring into the high school level.
Very good. Okay, Mr. Frostrom, we'll throw this next question at you. Voters want to know what you think of Prop 139, which would enshrine the fundamental right to an abortion in the state constitution.
Biology is complex. This is a tough moral issue for a lot of people, but the bottom line is the best decision makers on this issue are the women involved that are going to receive health care firsthand. The idea that we are going to put mandates in terms of weeks and viability limits and things like that is ridiculous, because what we're seeing nationwide is places where you have any type of abortion ban or abortion restriction, it has a chilling effect on doctors' ability to perform basic healthcare services for pregnant women. What you are seeing is that either the doctor's afraid of getting sued or arrested, or the hospital general counsel is got squeamish about what's going on, or some other issue, and women are not getting good health care. And that's a tragedy. And that's why I think it has to be fully supported. I really hope it passes by 15 or 20 points, and I think it will. But that is going to be so important to protect women's health moving forward in Arizona.
A good chunk of your constituents, however, believe there's another human being involved, and that is what is inside the woman. And so the woman's health would be covered under this. What about the baby's health for those who believe that is a human being, a baby inside her?
And this is that moral issue that I have is, it is a gray area for a lot of people, and I understand that. But what we're seeing, what you just said, I think is the question. I would reject the premise of the question. We are seeing a chilling effect that the women's health is not being considered in the way that the laws are written. And I think that is just, when we talk about exceptions for the health of the mother and that sort of thing, you don't want to have doctors having a debate, well, is she crashing early enough in the process of getting sepsis because she has, the water broke at 17 weeks, things like that. It's ridiculous that we are taking these decisions out of the hands of doctors and women.
Okay, Mr. Karp, Prop 139, what do you think about it?
Yes, I urge voters to vote yes. I'm voting yes. And that's what I have to say on it. I will say that David Gowan voted against repealing the 1864 abortion ban. And at that time, on the floor of the Senate in Arizona, he said that the repeal of the 1864 abortion ban was the same as 9/11. So that's whom I'm running against. This is an issue for me that is very clear. And you framed the second part of the question as that a big chunk of voters believe that that's a baby. And I do not want to denigrate that. That's their belief, and that's fine. I'm a person who believes in science, and the science says that's not a person, and because of that, I don't think that their belief should be used as part of government policy. It works for them, and I'm glad that it works for them. And I understand that it works for them, but that should not be government policy. We should still rely on science.
Okay, very good. Mr. Karp, we're going to throw this one at you. First, Governor Katie Hobbs set a record in April for the most vetoes from an Arizona governor. Those range from allowing squatters to immediately be removed from a residence to dropping the population number required for counties to move from 3 supervisors to 5. What do you think of her record? And did she veto any legislation that you would have supported?
There were so many. Unfair question. I don't know all of them. I know it was a record. I'm sure there's something in there that I probably would have said, hey, let's move forward. There was a couple cases on water policy that I was like, okay, we had to actually push for her to veto something, but it was on the gray area. And I was looking at it, and I had to talk to people in the district who said, no, we really don't want to support that, and here's the reason why. My attitude about vetoes was this was the Republican majorities shoving things out without getting serious feedback from the minority, and that's what you get. You get a lot of vetoes. And then what did they do? They did concurrent resolutions and got them on the ballot. So a lot, particularly the one you talked about homelessness and all that, that's now on the ballot because they decided that they weren't going to allow the governor to govern with vetoes. They certainly didn't have a problem with Governor Ducey when he was governor. We didn't see all these things pushed on the ballot, only a few things. So there's probably something in all those vetoes that I probably would have said, okay, let's try it. But I can't be specific.
And that kind of gets us back to that earlier question of us versus them. The Democrats wanted one thing in the legislature. The Republicans wanted another. They had more votes. They passed it. She says no. It's like ping pong here. And there's probably a little bit of.
But that's checks and balances. Come on. We all sort of believe in it, and then we don't like it when the governor vetoes.
Right. It's also a little tit for tat, though. I mean,
it sure was. There were too many vetoes. But if you want to take that further, they didn't approve how many of her appointments to run departments. So there's a lot going on here that needs to be dealt with to get more governing done.
Okay, very good. Mr. Frostrom, the record number of vetoes from the governor, what'd you think of that? And was there anything in there that you would have supported?
I don't know of anything specific that I would have supported outright. I'm disappointed at the lack of input that the minority party gets in the process. And it's not just, it doesn't have to pass by 80% across the both houses of the legislature to be valid in my eyes. But if you're cutting out the Democrats for every single negotiating point, then you're only going to get partisan stuff going to a Democratic governor, and the Democratic governor is not going to undercut the goals and policies that she got elected on. So I don't have an issue with that in that respect. I think that that's one of the things that would change if we flip the state legislature. You're going to get a lot more bipartisan, effects that will come down the pipe.
Okay, very good. And Mr. Frostrom, we're going to stick with you on this next question. Senate Republicans voted earlier this year to put the Secure Border Act on the November ballot. We're going to see that in the form of Prop 314. It would, among other things, give local law enforcement agencies and judges the power to enforce federal immigration law. Other sections of the act deal with access to housing and food assistance for those who are undocumented in Arizona. What do you think of the Secure Border Act?
I think we're on our way to criminalizing people that want to come to this country and work and build families. And I think that it's tragic. There is not a demand signal from the Republicans in the state legislature to have the Congress pass the border security bill that was torpedoed earlier this spring and negotiated by a very conservative Republican senator who's a border hawk. The issue, I think, is trying to figure out how we balance our the challenge with draining social services and supporting social services with these migrants that are coming across. How do we ensure that we don't end up in lawsuits and federal court cases for the next decade, spending millions of dollars on something? Because that's what's going to happen, is that if we pass this, we're going to end up spending a lot of money defending lawsuits in the federal court system, because it's not the job of the state of Arizona to run federal immigration policy. We can absolutely do things complementary with the federal government and work closely with the Border Patrol when they ask us to, but it's not the job of local authorities to do most of those functions that the Republican legislature thinks we should be doing.
This is very interesting, because the last polling I saw, this is very popular with voters, but I have not to talk to a single first responder law enforcement officer who supports this, and they're all coming out against it. And so, what are you hearing from people or law enforcement on this, Mr. Frostrom?
It's not something we've discussed at length in some of the campaign stops that I've seen. It has come up occasionally. I think the consensus is that we've got more local pressing problems than this. It is an important problem. The transiting of people coming through the border and those border areas has always been a problem. It was a problem here when I was stationed in Fort Huachuca in 2003, 2004. That's not a new phenomenon. But I think I would go back to my original point, is we're going to tie ourselves up in unwinnable litigation for the next decade and not accomplish a whole heck of a lot except spending taxpayer money on it.
Very good. Mr. Karp, Prop 314, the Secure Border Act. What do you think of it?
It's performative politics. It's probably unconstitutional. It's been tried before. It's an unfunded mandate. As far as for local law enforcement, and that's why local law enforcement is uniformly against it in general, at least law enforcement along the border. I live in Cochise County. I used to live about 1.5 miles from the border. There are issues in the border. This is not the solution. From a practical standpoint, who's paying to house these people? Are we expanding county jails? How are people going to be transported out of the country? There's a lot of practical concerns other than the moral concerns of this. But the reality is, I have not heard from anybody in government that I have talked to indirectly or directly that said, we want this. So I understand it's popular. The prior time this made it on the ballot, it passed very easily. Then there was constitutional challenges, as Greg mentioned. I think it's bad policy to try to solve a problem that really should be solved at the federal level. And one of the things that our state legislature could do is go back to our congressional delegation, as Greg was talking about, and demand you guys pass something. And I will say the Biden administration could do something, if they have the funds, to get funding down to the border of law enforcement communities like the county sheriffs to help them manage the border. Also, they could fund Governor Hobbs' National Army, the National Guard, to fund them, to allow them to come down to help in non-military, non-enforcement. Well, we can't get the money from the federal government. So the Biden administration could help if they have the extra funds. But I think 314 is a mistake.
Well, Mr. Karp, you are correct that it is popular with people. I'm going to ask you to speculate. Why do you think it is?
I think people are concerned. I think they think the border is out of control. I get that. I think that they like the idea of being tough. It's a simple solution, and it makes people feel good. And they really haven't concerned when you talk to them and say, well, where are we putting these people when you arrest them? What do you plan to do? So you want them immediately removed from the country, which of course is illegal. So how are they going to be housed? How are they going to be moved? Who's paying for it? Well, the federal government's paying for it. No, that's not what 314 says. So I think when you explain to them how the mechanics of it work, they're a lot less, oh, I get it, but we want to send a message. And I get the message. The message is being sent. But let's get the message back to our congressional delegation and to the federal government.
Well, you're being polite, but I won't be. You're really talking about low information voters who are easily swayed by, as you pointed out, kind of a tough guy stance on this, and they're a little tired of it.
I think you're, I'm not going to, no, I'm going to go with, because it is complex. It is complex.
It is.
You know, to do the details, if I've told you the things that I read about water policy that make my eyes roll back in my head, I mean, and I'm going, and I'm into it. And understanding how to secure the border, I get it. I'm not going to call them low information. I'm going to call them sane people that have a life.
Okay, Mr. Frostrom, speculate. Why do you think it's so popular?
Because to kind of elaborate on Bob's point, policymaking is not sexy. And when you get into the deals on policymaking, that loses a lot of people. I think there's been a huge amount of demagoguery, a huge amount of fear mongering about this issue. And these are real concerns. And these migrant communities that are challenging us are a drain on social services and local resources. That is absolutely a given. The question is, how do we absorb the workers that we need for the future? How do we absorb these new members of their community until their migration status is clarified by the federal government in the interim? And some of that's going to be funding. Some of that's going to be local programs at the local level. So I think that explains a lot of it right there. Policy makes it not sexy.
Very, very good. And let me be clear, low information voter does not speak to intelligence. It just means that they are not thinking through the repercussions of this. And you know what? There's an awful lot in that ballot measure. There's an awful lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
How it got past the Arizona Supreme Court, I don't understand, because it's more than one issue. And ballot measures are only supposed to be single issue.
And that crossed my mind too, quite honestly. Yeah. As I was going through. Okay, so here's a question from a voter, Mr. Frostrom. We're going to start with you. Given Arizona's near majority revenue source is intergovernment transfers, that's according to the state treasurer's revenue report, what are your plans to make Arizona less reliant on federal funding?
What we need to do is grow business community. We've got a healthy business environment already. I think that's one of the challenges that we have, is growing our workforce through better education systems, ensuring that we maintain a positive business culture. And you're starting to see a lot of that growth. You know, the Maricopa County is growing explosively. It is not necessarily trickling down to Southern Arizona. So when you talk about our local constituents, they're not seeing the benefits of the Intel plant that was built in Chandler 10 years ago. They're not seeing, even in Pima County. I'm in Vail, so on the south side of Tucson, we've added 3,500, 4,000 jobs in the last few years between Raytheon, the Home Goods Distribution Center, the Amazon Distribution Center. How do we get those benefits out to the places that are not near population centers? And I think things like rural broadband is a good example of what will be an equalizer for the business environment. When we talk about every single person in Southern Arizona, no matter what zip code they live in, has access to high quality, affordable broadband. And some of that can be, pushed through the legislature, pushed through the state, the governor's office, and, using federal grants and things like that. That would be a good mechanism to start that process.
Very good. Bob Carp, plans to make Arizona less reliant on federal funding?
Yes. I'm going to say two things that are controversial, and, that's the way it's going to be. The first is, let's stop giving tax breaks to special interests, particularly corporate interests. This idea, let's give a tax break so that we get a business here. works great for Maricopa, maybe even works a little bit for Pima or around there. And I've been interviewed by various groups, and they always say, the first question they ask me is always about, will you support a tax credit if we bring business? And my response very quickly is, what businesses have you ever brought to Greenlee, Graham, Cochise counties, or even Santa Cruz? Oh, well, we have concepts. And that was in 2018 and 2020, and there are no businesses that they have brought down here. So I am not in favor of tax breaks. The other thing, which is going to may create pitchforks and torches coming for me, is I don't like Ducey's flat tax. That got shoved through, and for me, we should add an additional bracket, probably for personal income, homes, households of $250,000 or more. We should add a bracket back on again. This flat tax is just a gift to the wealthy, and we should also add a bracket to corporate taxes. We've given away hundreds of millions of dollars every year in special tax breaks and tax credits. A way to start to get off of this reliance on federal funding is to get our own house in order on income and expense.
Okay, very good. Final question before closing comments. And Mr. Karp, we will start with you. It's about affordable housing. In January, Governor Hobbs announced a $49 million in state and federal dollars for 19 affordable housing projects across the state. Months later, she signed House Bill 2720, which allows for casitas or accessory dwellings to be built on single-family home lots. Still, affordable housing in the form of apartments or starter homes is elusive. What can the state, or what should the state do to account for more affordable housing?
This is really tough, and I am opposed to this idea that you build casitas and whatever. And as it was originally proposed, there was going to be some limits on it in the sense that it couldn't be used for an Airbnb. That went out of the bill. And I'm going to tell you right now, people that are going to build casitas in R1 are going to rent them out they're going to do short-term rentals. So I don't think that's a solution to affordable housing at all. I don't think that the market, unregulated market, is probably a solution either. Land costs and such. I would give incentives to building denser housing. That's probably apartments, duplexes, and quadplexes, and incentivize that through a reallocation of bonding for housing. So the idea of doing, we're going to change some zoning laws, I don't think that's going to solve it. I don't think her program, it's a small step, it's not enough until we really say we're going to have to increase density, and we have to do it by incentivizing it. That's going to be the solution. It's a long-term problem. Where do we find cheaper land? It's just becoming very hard. Come down here. Come down to Graham and Greenlee and Cochise. We've got land, folks. Come on down.
There we go. Mr. Frostrom, affordable housing, what more can the state do than the governor has already done this year?
I think transitioning from a no in my backyard, not in my backyard, to a yes in my backyard policy is a pro-growth strategy. So that's going to pay long-term benefits. I think the other thing is talking to housing developers. What you're seeing is it's very similar to what has happened with cars and trucks in the last 30 years. The profit margins on what used to be a Chevy S10 in the 1990s is just not there. So you get a truck that's 2.5, 3 tons, and you get a lot more bang for your buck, and you also make a lot more money for the car manufacturer. Home builders have the same challenge set. They can make a lot more money by building a 2,500 square foot house than they can by building a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, 1,200 square foot house. and that's where their incentive is. So how do we change that incentive structure so that they are incentivized to build starter homes and increase the housing supply on a rapid basis in developments?
And really, that's what it's all about, is supply. That's what's
Right.
driving up.
We have a supply problem. The challenge is nationwide. After the Great Recession and the housing crash in the late 2000s, we never actually recovered our ability to build houses, and now we have a supply shortage because the housing construction industry never really recovered after the 2008-2009 recession.
We also have a land shortage. So I wasn't really being facetious about the idea of, come on down to rural Southeast Arizona and build. Of course, you have to have jobs, you have to have schools, you have to have all of that. So one of the things for the state government to look at, again, is to incentivize new business coming to where there's inexpensive land and then building. So there's a lot of complexity to this, but I do still believe that, where we are in urban Arizona, you're going to have to increase density, but doing casitas, that's not a solution.
Okay, very good. Well, we're going to move on to our closing statements. Take a couple of minutes to make your best pitch to people. And Mr. Frostrom, we are going to start with you.
Thank you for having me, Dan. Thank you for the viewers out there and submitting questions. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be part of this process. I joined this race because I want to serve my community. That is who I am. I've spent 23 years in the Army serving the nation, and I want to continue to be involved and engaged and serve my community. And the bottom line is that the Republican leadership in Southern Arizona has not represented the interests of the residents of Southern Arizona and has oftentimes prioritized business interests over community and residents' interests. And that's why I'm running, and that's why I'm asking for your vote. Thank you.
Very good. Mr. Karp.
Dan, I will thank you, and I will thank the Clean Elections Commission as well. Both Greg and I are participating candidates. I don't know that everybody understands what that is. I'll take a moment to say Clean Elections participating candidates, once they qualify, they get public funding from the Clean Elections Commission, and we agree not to take funds from any other source. So I think it may be unique to Arizona throughout the country. It's a really wonderful program that allows candidates like Greg and I to run and to still be able to campaign. I've run on saying I want to flip the state legislature because I think 50 years of Republican control of the state House, all 50 years, the last 50 years. Of the 50 years they've controlled the state Senate, 47 years, 2 years they shared it because it was split, and 1 year the Democrats had it. So when Republicans complain about state government, the Republicans are responsible for where we are in the state. So I'm delighted that we had what a great forum and discussion. And the thing that bothers me is none of the Republicans, we have heard their answers to these questions. And that's a fundamental problem here. So if you're ready for change because you don't know what these people think, vote for Greg and vote for me, because we've made it very clear what our thoughts are on these issues. Thank you.
Okay, very good. It has almost been fun. I've really enjoyed it.
Just almost, Dan? Oh, come
Almost. Well, this concludes our debate. To our candidates, again, thank you for deciding that this is important enough for you to participate in. It was, I know it's important to the voters. To the voters, we thank all of you who took the time to watch our forum and inform yourselves before the November 5th general election. We encourage you to visit azcleanelections.gov for official, accurate voting information going forward. To all of you, have a great rest of your evening.